Many of us desire to seek true happiness, but will any of us find it? It's actually not as hard to find as you would think. The answer is in knowing the living God, which is the most valuable thing in our lives. But like we explained in the previous video, our conception of God is often misguided, and many of us don't actually know the authentic living God. So how do we come to know the living God? Knowing God is not just a cerebral task, but rather one carried out by one's entire existence. We may never be able to clearly articulate and define who God is to us, but rather mold our life in accordance to our understanding of Him. But as we come to know God, the eyes of our hearts are enlightened. We see the abundance and power of life. Knowing God is a process and journey of God hiding from us and us seeking and finding Him. We can get arrogant with ourselves and our own knowledge of God, which causes God to hide from us again in an ongoing cycle. As we can never fully know God, our discovery in who He is an ongoing process until we die. We get to know our God through stages. The first stage is of accepting our ignorance. We must accept that we don't know God. When our ignorance is unacknowledged, we believe we know there is everything to know. This often manifests in religious people under the guise of religious conviction by blindly following a misguided concept of God. Unacknowledged ignorance also manifests in smart, prideful people who don't want to admit that they don't understand something. When we enter into the world of the living God, we finally realize the limitations of our understanding. We come to understand that we need God's grace to survive and see His presence in our lives. Often, it is in times of crisis we realize our own ignorance and limitations. Knowing God can only be done through faith, as faith is acknowledged ignorance that comes from a strong desire to know God. It is about learning to believe in order to understand, not trying to understand in order to believe. We must cast away our own idols, concepts, prejudice, and assumptions. We are created in God's image, not the other way around. Through this, the new revelation of God becomes a gift, not something we attain through our own efforts. The second stage is of seeking. Acknowledging our ignorance sets us free from the bounds of our own concepts and allows us the space and freedom to find the living God. Therefore, it is natural that we must seek God next. God reveals Himself to those who seek, thus He will reveal Himself to us when we seek Him. It says in the Bible, "Ask, and it will be given you. Search, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened for you. For everyone who asks receives, and everyone who searches finds, and for everyone who knocks, the door will be opened." We will all eventually discover our living God if we keep on seeking and desiring to know Him. The third stage is of waiting. Knowing God is not the result of our efforts. Ultimately, it is only through God's grace and His reveal that we are able to know Him. Lucky for us, God has a strong desire to reveal Himself to us. There is both an active and passive part to knowing God. The active portion is in seeking, searching, and knocking. The passive portion is in waiting for God to reveal Himself to you. The journey to knowing God is a continuous cycle between these two parts. We don't know how God will change us because He is beyond our imagination. Therefore, we must wait and allow God to come to us. The most important thing to do when we wait for God is to listen. God speaks to each one of us in a unique way. Our understanding of the things He tells us will also all be different. Therefore, our understanding of God will be unique and authentic. Further, knowing God is knowing ourselves, as we are created in God's image. By coming to know God, we discover ourselves along with the essence of life. Why should we try to know God? Knowing God is eternal life, a life not about its length, but rather its quality, the quality that you would want to live with for eternity. When we come to know the living God, knowing Him becomes the most valuable thing in life. Meaning, purpose, direction, passion, abundance, hopefulness, joy, aliveness, and thankfulness are all fruits of getting to know the living God. It changes us internally, changing the way we perceive our lives and experience life. It is internally that real happiness is fostered. If we are happy inside, we find ways to enjoy life regardless of our external circumstances. When our inner life is strong, our outer life cannot tarnish or weaken it. Look at St. Paul. After coming to know his unique God, St. Paul's life did not physically get better. It actually became much more difficult, but he was able to find true joy and happiness in his life because his inner self became so strong through knowing the living God. In our life, we will encounter God who hides himself in situations and reveals himself in others. But even when God is hidden, we must actively seek him out. Like playing hide and seek, what is the point of hiding if nobody will seek you out? In our modern world, we don't create space for the living God. We only create space for our own concept of God. But without the living God, we become corrupted with our own greed and intelligence. We must search to know our God in a lifelong journey of discovery, and the eyes of our hearts will be enlightened. Only then will we truly see the abundance and power of life.